Hello there, and welcome to History to Fall Asleep. Tonight, we are following one of the longest and most human journeys in history, the history of medicine. It is a story of people trying to understand pain, injury, birth, fever, sleep, grief, hunger, infection, and the quiet mystery of the body. It begins long before laboratories, hospitals, or printed textbooks. It begins with care, with someone noticing that another person is hurt, with hands preparing food, supporting a body, cleaning a wound, offering water, recording a symptom, or simply staying nearby. Over thousands of years, different communities developed their own ways of healing and explaining illness. Some knowledge was carried in stories. Some was preserved in manuscripts. Some was learned through observation, craft, and repeated practice. Some ideas were later changed or rejected. Others became part of the foundations of modern medicine. Tonight, we will move gently through ancient healing traditions, Greek and Roman medicine, medieval hospitals, surgery, anatomy, vaccination, public health, nursing, antibiotics, medical imaging, ethics, and the many people whose work shaped the care we know today. This is not medical advice. It is a calm historical journey. There is no need to remember every date or every name. Let the facts arrive softly, then drift away again. Imagine an old library after dark. Imagine a clay tablet, a folded medical manuscript, a quiet ward with low lamps, a simple glass bottle on a shelf, or a nurse walking slowly down a silent corridor. If these gentle history journeys help you rest, you are welcome to subscribe to History to Fall Asleep. But for now, let your shoulders soften. Let your breathing slow. Let the day become a little more distant. And let us begin our quiet walk through the history of medicine. Fact 1. Medicine begins with care long before writing begins. The history of medicine is older than medical books. Long before people left written records, they cared for injuries, births, illness, aging, and death. Archaeologists sometimes find skeletons showing that a person survived a serious injury only because other people must have helped them for a long time. This does not tell us exactly what was said or done, but it tells us something important. Care was social. It depended on families, neighbors, and communities. Before medicine became a profession, it was already an act of attention. Someone saw suffering and chose not to leave another person alone. Let that thought settle for a moment, like a page resting quietly on a desk after a lamp has been lowered. Somewhere in the past, a caregiver is preparing a room, a bed, a note, or a simple cup of water. The work is quiet, and you can let it continue without you. Fact 2. The earliest medical evidence is incomplete and must be read carefully. Bones, tools, plants, artworks, graves, and ancient buildings can offer clues about past healing, but they do not give us a complete record. A healed fracture may show survival, but not the full story of who helped. A plant found near a burial may have had a medical use, a ceremonial meaning, or both. Historians and archaeologists must combine evidence carefully rather than assuming too much. The earliest history of medicine is therefore partly a history of humility. We learn from traces, but we also accept that many voices, especially those of ordinary caregivers, were never written down. Picture an old hospital corridor growing still, with only soft light beneath a distant doorway. There is no need to hold every detail. Let the old names, places, and discoveries pass by like lights in faraway windows. Fact 3. Trepanation is one of the oldest known surgical practices. Trepanation, the making of an opening in the skull, appears in archaeological remains from several regions and very different periods. Some skulls show healing around the opening, meaning that the person survived the procedure. We do not always know why it was performed. It may have been connected with injury, pain, ritual, or other conditions people understood differently from us. What is clear is that ancient communities were capable of deliberate and sometimes skilled intervention in the body. The practice is a reminder that surgery has a very long and complex history, extending far beyond the world of modern operating rooms. Take an easy breath and let the names become lighter, leaving only the calm shape of a long human story. Imagine the shelves of history closing gently, not disappearing, only waiting calmly until someone wishes to return. Fact 4. Healing knowledge was often tied to plants, foods, and local landscapes. Many early medical traditions drew on plants, minerals, foods, oils, and other materials found in local environments. A healer's knowledge depended on seasons, water, soil, trade, and the habits of animals and plants. Such knowledge could be practical, symbolic, spiritual, or all of these at once. Over time, recipes were repeated, adapted, and sometimes written down. The history of medicine is therefore also a history of landscapes. A forest, river valley, mountain slope, or market garden could become a place where people learned which materials mattered and how they might be prepared. Imagine a small glass bottle on a wooden shelf, catching a little moonlight before the room becomes quiet again. The story can continue at its own pace. You can rest beside it, as though listening to rain beyond a softly lit room. Fact 5. Ancient Egyptian medicine survives in remarkable written sources. Ancient Egypt left several medical papyri that preserve recipes, observations, instructions, and explanations of illness. These texts show a mixture of practical treatment, careful description, religious language, and ritual practice. That combination should not surprise us. Ancient people did not separate the body, society, and sacred world in the same way modern medicine often tries to do. Egyptian healers could observe injuries, plaos, while protective formulas, or protective formulas. The surviving manuscripts are important because they show medicine as a written craft, with knowledge passed between generations through both memory and text. Let the history pause here, as though a library has closed for the night and the books have begun to rest. For a few seconds, let your mind become as still as a darkened library, with every page safe and every question allowed to remain unanswered. Fact 6. The Edwin Smith papyrus is especially known for its attention to injuries. The Edwin Smith papyrus is often described as one of the oldest surviving surgical texts. It presents cases of wounds and injuries in an orderly way, often describing examination, diagnosis, and possible treatment. Its language can feel strikingly practical, especially when compared with the more magical or religious elements found in other ancient texts. The papyrus does not represent all Egyptian medicine, but it shows that systematic observation had a place within it. A healer could look at a wound, notice movement or sensation, and make decisions based on what the body revealed. For a moment, leave the questions open. They have waited across centuries and can wait until morning. Picture the long chain of people who cared for others before you were here, moving quietly through time, like a distant line of warm lamps. Fact 7. The Ebers papyrus preserves a broad collection of medical material. The Ebers papyrus is one of the most famous ancient Egyptian medical documents. It includes a wide range of remedies and discussions of illness. While, like many old medical texts, it combines approaches that later readers may call practical, spiritual, or symbolic. Its importance lies not in whether every remedy would meet modern standards, but in the picture it gives us of a society trying to record health knowledge. The papyrus turns experience into a library of possibilities that people wanted to collect, preserve, and share, what they believed might help the sick. Picture a careful hand turning the page of an old manuscript, not in a hurry, only following the line slowly onward. You do not need to solve the whole history of the body. A slow breath and a quiet room are enough for this moment. Fact 8. Mesopotamian healing, mixed observation, ritual, and written record-keeping. In ancient Mesopotamia, healers used clay tablets to record remedies, symptoms, incantations, and classifications of illness. The region produced both practical healing traditions and ritual forms of care. Modern readers may be tempted to divide these sharply, but for ancient communities, they were often connected. A person's illness could be understood through the body, the household, the gods, and the wider social order. The tablets matter because they show early medicine as a field of writing and memory. A problem could be described, copied, compared, and passed down across generations. Let the room become peaceful again, with the soft sound of rain or wind somewhere beyond the window. Let the idea of care become simple again. A hand nearby, a gentle voice, and time moving slowly through the night. Fact 9. Ayurveda developed through long and diverse traditions in South Asia. Ayurveda is a broad historical tradition of medicine from South Asia, shaped over many centuries by texts, teachers, practitioners, local knowledge, and changing social worlds. It is not a single frozen system from one moment in the past. Classical works associated with Ayurveda discuss diet, lifestyle, diagnosis, herbal substances, surgery, and ideas about balance in the body. Today, Ayurvedic traditions remain living and diverse, practiced and understood in different ways. A respectful history recognizes both their deep roots and their continuing change, rather than treating them as a museum piece. Imagine a low lamp in a quiet ward, steady enough to make the shadows gentle rather than dark. Imagine a clock ticking softly in a hallway, not asking anything from you, only marking that the night is becoming deeper. Fact 10. The Charaka tradition is associated with internal medicine and careful observation. The Charaka Samhita is one of the major classical texts of Ayurveda. Like many long-lived works, it has layers and was shaped over time rather than written all at once by a single modern-style author. It includes reflections on diagnosis, diet, ethics, medicines, and the relationship between patient and practitioner. Its historical importance lies partly in its attention to observing the individual person. The text reflects a world in which health was linked with habits, seasons, food, environment, and balance. It shows medicine as a careful art of noticing patterns in a life. Rest with the thought that medicine is often built from small observations, noticed again and again. The facts can remain in the background now, like a calm conversation heard from another room as sleep begins to arrive. Fact 11. The Sushruta tradition is closely linked with surgery. The Sushruta Samhita is another foundational Ayurvedic work, often associated with surgical knowledge. It discusses instruments, wounds, fractures, training, and procedures in ways that show the importance of practical craft. The text is also remembered for its attention to the training of a surgeon, including the need to practice skills before treating people. Like all ancient medical writing, it belongs to its own historical context and should not be read as a modern manual. Still, it reminds us that surgery has long required discipline, preparation, steadiness, and respect for the body. Let the fact drift away at its own pace, leaving behind only the idea of care, continuing softly in the background. Somewhere in the past, a caregiver is preparing a room, a bed, a note, or a simple cup of water. The work is quiet, and you can let it continue without you. Fact 12. Classical Chinese medicine grew through many centuries of practice and writing. Medical traditions in China developed over long periods and included herbal knowledge, pulse examination, dietary thought, body practices, acupuncture traditions, and written theories about balance and change. These practices were not identical across all regions or centuries. They developed through teachers, families, court medicine, local healers, and texts. The long history of Chinese medicines shows that medical systems can be both learned and lived. They can exist in formal books and in daily habits around food, seasons, sleep, movement, and the relationship between people and the environment. Picture a city at night, where clean water moves through hidden pipes and people settle into sleep without seeing the work that protects them. There is no need to hold every detail. Let the old names, places, and discoveries pass by like lights in faraway windows. Fact 13. The Huangdi Neijing became a major classical text in Chinese medicine. The Huangdi Neijing, often translated as The Yellow Emperor's Inner Classic is a foundational collection of discussions about the body, health, seasons, and medical reasoning in the Chinese tradition. It was compiled over time and reflects multiple voices rather than a single moment of authorship. The text uses ideas of balance, circulation, and relationship to explain health and illness. Its importance is historical and cultural, as much as clinical. It shows how a medical tradition can build a detailed language for the body that differs from later European and anatomical models while still aiming to make sense of experience. T-tanks, experience. Take a slow breath and imagine a calm archive full of notebooks, diagrams, and old letters waiting quietly in the dark. Imagine the shelves of history closing gently, not disappearing, only waiting calmly until someone wishes to return. Fact 14. Acupuncture traditions have a long and evolving history. Acupuncture is often presented as something ancient and unchanged, but its history is more dynamic. Tools, points, theories, and methods developed across different periods and regions. Written texts, archaeological finds, and later manuals all contribute to what we know, though the evidence does not create one simple timeline. The key historical point is that medical practices evolve even when they are rooted in older traditions. Practitioners debate methods, adapt tools, teach students, and respond to changing societies. History is not a still photograph. It is a long conversation. Allow the story to become softer at the edges, like footsteps fading down a long, empty hallway. The story can continue at its own pace. You can rest beside it, as though listening to rain beyond a softly lit room. Fact 15. Ancient Greek medicine encouraged observation of the natural world. Greek medical writers associated with the Hippocratic tradition often tried to explain illness through natural causes rather than only through divine intervention. This did not mean that ancient Greek society stopped believing in the gods, or that every healer followed the science ideas. It meant that some writers emphasized observation, environment, food, seasons, and bodily change. Their work became influential because it offered a language for discussing disease as something that could be watched and described. The habit of looking closely at the patient became one of the lasting themes in later medical history. For now, leave the instruments still on the table and let the quiet of the room take over. For a few seconds, let your mind become as still as a darkened library, with every page safe and every question allowed to remain unanswered. Fact 16. The Hippocratic corpus is a collection, not the work of one person alone. The Hippocratic corpus is a group of ancient Greek medical texts connected with the name Hippocrates. Why? Modern scholarship recognizes that the collection was written by different authors over time. Some texts disagree with others. This is important because it prevents us from turning Hippocrates into a single hero who invented medicine by himself. The collection is better understood as evidence of a lively medical tradition, filled with debate, observation, theory, and uncertainty. Its value lies not only in individual ideas, but in the attempt to make medical knowledge discussable and shareable. Picture an old garden of medicinal plants beneath the moon, each leaf moving gently in a cool night breeze. Picture the long chain of people who cared for others before you were here, moving quietly through time like a distant line of warm lamps. Fact 17. The idea of the four humours shaped medicine for many centuries. Ancient Greek and later Roman and medieval writers often described health through the balance of four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. This framework was not a modern scientific description of the body, but it became enormously influential in Europe and parts of the Middle East. It shaped ideas about diet, temperament, treatment, and the seasons. The long life of humoral theory teaches an important lesson. A medical explanation can feel coherent and useful to generations of people, even when later evidence leads to very different conclusions. Let the next chapter wait. There is nowhere you need to go tonight. You do not need to solve the whole history of the body. A slow breath and a quiet room are enough for this moment. Fact 18. Asclepiae were healing sanctuaries in the ancient Greek world. Sanctuaries dedicated to Asclepius, the Greek god of healing, were places where people sought care, hope, ritual, rest, and interpretation of dreams. Visitors might bathe, make offerings, sleep in sacred spaces, or follow instructions connected with the sanctuary. These sites remind us that healing has often involved architecture and atmosphere, as well as medicine in the narrow sense. A person who was ill needed more than a remedy. They might need a place to travel to, a community to receive them, a ritual to structure their fear, and time to rest. Imagine a distant bell marking the hour, while the long history of care continues without demanding your attention. Let the idea of care become simple again. A hand nearby, a gentle voice, and time moving slowly through the night. Fact 19. Roman medicine was shaped by cities, armies, and empire. Roman medical life drew on Greek traditions, but also developed within a vast empire of roads, military camps, bathhouses, ports, and crowded cities. Roman writers discussed diet, exercise, surgery, drugs, and the management of households. The empire's scale helped move medical texts, ingredients, and practitioners across long distances. At the same time, urban life brought sanitation problems, outbreaks, injuries, and inequality. Roman medicine was therefore not only about famous physicians. It was also about how people tried to maintain health in a large, connected, and sometimes difficult world. Rest beside this thought for a moment, as if sitting near a window in a quiet room after everyone has gone home. Imagine a clock ticking softly in a hallway, not asking anything from you, only marking that the night is becoming deeper. Fact 20. Roman water systems show the public side of health. Aqueducts, fountains, baths, drains, and sewers are often remembered as engineering achievements, but they also shaped everyday health. Clean water and waste removal are not glamorous discoveries, yet they can matter enormously for a population. Roman systems were not perfect, and they did not make every city safe or clean. Still, they show that societies understood something basic. Health is affected by shared infrastructure. A person's well-being depends not only on what happens in a healer's room, but also on water, streets, food, housing, and the air around them. Let the knowledge become a soft background hum, steady and distant, while your own thoughts begin to slow. The facts can remain in the background now, like a calm conversation heard from another room as sleep begins to arrive. Fact 21. Roman military communities created organized spaces for care. The Roman army needed to manage injury, illness, travel, and recovery among large numbers of soldiers. Archaeologists have identified buildings, often described as military hospitals or valle valetudinaria in some Roman forts. These were not hospitals in the modern sense, but they show organized attention to the health of a military population. Medicine has often grown alongside institutions that needed to care for many people at once, including armies, monasteries, cities, and later factories and schools. The history is not always peaceful, but it reveals how practical needs can shape systems of care. Let that thought settle for a moment, like a page resting quietly on a desk after a lamp has been lowered. Somewhere in the past, a caregiver is preparing a room, a bed, a note, or a simple cup of water. The work is quiet, and you can let it continue without you. Fact 22. Galen became one of the most influential medical writers in history. Galen was a Greek-speaking physician born in Pergamon in 129 CE, who later worked in Rome. He studied anatomy, treated gladiators, wrote extensively, and performed experiments involving animals. His ideas about the body, humors, and organs influenced medical scholars in Europe and the Middle East for many centuries. Galen valued observation and reasoning, but later readers sometimes treated his writings as authority. That should not be questioned. His long influence shows both the power and the danger of famous texts. A great teacher can inspire inquiry, yet later generations may forget that inquiry was part of the lesson. Picture an old hospital corridor growing still, with only soft light beneath a distant doorway. There is no need to hold every detail. Let the old names, places, and discoveries pass by like lights in faraway windows. Fact 23. Dioscorides helped shape the long history of pharmacology. Dioscorides was a Greek physician and writer whose work, De Materia Medica, described medicinal substances and their preparation. Written in the 1st century CE, it remained influential for centuries in Europe and the Middle East. The text drew together knowledge about plants, minerals, and drugs. It traveled through manuscript copies, translations, illustrations, and commentaries. Its survival shows how medicine depends on cataloging. Someone must name materials, compare them, record how they are prepared, and pass those records onward. Pharmacy begins not only with bottles and shops, but with the patient work of description. Take an easy breath and let the names become lighter, leaving only the calm shape of a long human story. Imagine the shelves of history closing gently, not disappearing, only waiting calmly until someone wishes to return. Fact 24. Byzantine scholars helped preserve and adapt earlier medical learning. After the Western Roman Empire changed and fragmented, Greek medical texts continued to be copied, studied, and used in the Byzantine world. Scholars, physicians, and scribes preserved works associated with Hippocrates, Galen, Dioscorides, and others. They also produced their own summaries, manuals, and commentaries. Knowledge does not simply survive by itself. It survives. People copy it, teach it, debate it, and decide that it is worth carrying forward. Byzantine medicine is part of the bridge between the ancient Mediterranean world and later medical scholarship in Europe and the Islamic world. Imagine a small glass bottle on a wooden shelf, catching a little moonlight before the room becomes quiet again. The story can continue at its own pace. You can rest beside it, as though listening to rain beyond a softly lit room. Fact 25. Translation was one of medicine's great historical tools. Medical knowledge has crossed languages many times. Greek texts were translated into Syriac and Arabic. Arabic works later entered Latin and other European languages. Knowledge from South Asia, China, Africa, and the Americas also traveled through translation, trade, migration, and local contact. Translation is never only about replacing one word with another. It requires judgment. A translator must decide how to carry a concept into a new language and culture. Medical history is full of such decisions. Many ideas became influential, not because they stayed in one place, but because someone made them understandable elsewhere. Let the history pause here, as though a library has closed for the night, and the books have begun to rest. For a few seconds, let your mind become as still as a darkened library, with every page safe and every question allowed to remain unanswered. Fact 26. Islamic medicine built on many earlier traditions and developed new work of its own. Between roughly the 8th and 14th centuries, scholars writing in Arabic and Persian worked with Greek, Syriac, Persian, Indian, and other medical traditions. They translated texts, compared ideas, wrote new commentaries, observed patients, organized hospitals, and developed pharmacy and surgery. It is misleading to describe this period only as a time when ancient Greek knowledge was stored for Europe. Medical scholars in the Islamic world made important contributions in their own right. The history is one of active study, criticism, adaptation, and innovation across a wide connected region. For a moment, leave the questions open. They have waited across centuries and can wait until morning. Picture the long chain of people who cared for others before you were here, moving quietly through time like a distant line of warm lamps. Fact 27. Al-Razi became famous for clinical observation and medical writing. Al-Razi, known in Latin as Rhazes, was a physician and scholar who lived in the 9th and 10th centuries. He wrote widely on medicine, philosophy, and practical care. Later readers valued his clinical observations and his discussions of diseases such as smallpox and measles. Like many historic figures, his work belongs to a world with theories different from modern medicine. Yet his attention to cases, comparison, and medical writing made him influential for centuries. Alraz reminds us that medicine advances not only through dramatic discoveries, but also through careful records of what people observe. Picture a careful hand turning the page of an old manuscript, not in a hurry, only following the line slowly onward. You do not need to solve the whole history of the body. A slow breath and a quiet room are enough for this moment. Fact 28. Ibn Sina's canon of medicine shaped teaching for centuries. Ibn Sina, often called Avicenna in Latin, lived in the late 10th and early 11th centuries. His canon of medicine organized a vast amount of medical knowledge into a structured work that influenced education in parts of the Islamic world and Europe for centuries. The canon discussed theory, diagnosis, drugs, and treatment within the intellectual framework of its time. Its long influence came from its clarity, scope, and usefulness as a teaching text. A medical book can become powerful when it gives students a way to arrange a large and complicated body of knowledge. Let the room become peaceful again, with the soft sound of rain or wind somewhere beyond the window. Let the idea of care become simple again. A hand nearby, a gentle voice, and time moving slowly through the night. Fact 29. Bimaristans were important hospitals in medieval Islamic societies. Bimaristan is a word used for hospitals in several medieval Islamic cities. These institutions could provide care, teaching, pharmacies, and sometimes specialized spaces for different kinds of patients. Their forms varied by region and period, and historians avoid imagining every Bimaristan as identical to a modern hospital. Still, they show that organized urban care existed in sophisticated ways outside medieval Europe, as well as within it. Hospitals are not simply buildings where medicine happens. They are social institutions shaped by charity, government, religion, education, and the needs of cities. Imagine a low lamp in a quiet ward, steady enough to make the shadows gentle rather than dark. Imagine a clock ticking softly in a hallway, not asking anything from you, only marking that the night is becoming deeper. Fact 30. Pharmacy became a specialized craft in many medieval cities. As medical knowledge expanded, the preparation and sale of drugs increasingly required specialized skills. In medieval Islamic societies, pharmacists developed professional roles connected with ingredients, compounding, storage, and quality. Similar forms of specialization emerged in other regions over time. This separation of tasks mattered because a physician, a drug preparer, and a caregiver might not be the same person. Medicine became a network of crafts. A remedy depended on growers, traders, translators, scribes, healers, and people who knew how to measure, mix, and preserve delicate materials. Rest with the thought that medicine is often built from small observations noticed again and again. The facts can remain in the background now, like a calm conversation heard from another room as sleep begins to arrive. Fact 31. Fact: Al-Zahrawi is remembered for writing about surgery and instruments. Al-Zahrawi, known in Latin as Albucasis, was a physician and surgeon who lived in Al-Andalus around the turn of the first millennium. His major medical work included detailed descriptions and illustrations of surgical instruments. His writing later influenced surgical priests in Europe through translation. The importance of such work is not only that it lists tools, it treats surgery as a craft that needs preparation, method, and teaching. Instruments can look simple in a drawing, but they carry the memory of many hands, learning how to use them with care. Let the fact drift away at its own pace, leaving behind only the idea of care continuing softly in the background. Somewhere in the past, a caregiver is preparing a room, a bed, a note, or a simple cup of water. The work is quiet, and you can let it continue without you. Fact 32. Ibn al-Nafis questioned earlier ideas about the movement of blood. Ibn al-Nafis was a 13th century physician who wrote critically about aspects of Galen's anatomy and physiology. In his commentary on Ibn Sina, he described a form of pulmonary circulation, arguing that blood moved from the right side of the heart to the lungs and then left side, rather than passing directly through the heart's wall. His work is an important reminder that scholars in the medieval Islamic world did not simply repeat old authorities. They could question, revise, and propose new explanations based on close reading and observation. Picture a city at night where clean water moves through hidden pipes and people settle into sleep without seeing the work that protects them. There is no need to hold every detail. Let the old names, places, and discoveries pass by like lights in faraway windows. Fact 33. Medieval European monasteries often cared for the sick. In medieval Europe, monasteries could provide hospitality, food, shelter, and care for people who were ill, poor, traveling, or in need. Monastic infirmaries were not identical to modern hospitals, and access varied widely. Yet they formed part of a larger world of charitable care. Religious communities preserved books, grew herbs, trained caregivers, and created spaces for rest. The history of medicine includes many institutions built around the idea that tending the sick was a moral obligation. Care often grew from values as much as from scientific theory. Take a slow breath and imagine a calm archive full of notebooks, diagrams, and old letters waiting quietly in the dark. Imagine the shelves of history closing gently, not disappearing, only waiting calmly until someone wishes to return. Fact 34. Midwives and women healers were central to everyday care. For much of history, women provided essential care in homes and communities, assisting births, tending children, preparing remedies, nursing the ill, and sharing practical knowledge. Written sources often give them less attention than male physicians, especially when professional medicine became more formalized. This does not mean their work was less important. It means that historical records can be uneven. Midwifery and household care were vital parts of medicine's story. A fuller history looks beyond famous books and universities to the rooms where ordinary people were born, fed, comforted, and cared for. Allow the story to become softer at the edges, like footsteps fading down a long, empty hallway. The story can continue at its own pace. You can rest beside it as though listening to rain beyond a softly lit room. Fact 35. Medieval universities helped formalize medical teaching in Europe. From the later Middle Ages onward, universities in Europe increasingly taught medicine through lectures, texts, disputation, and eventually anatomical study. Students learned from authoritative works, including those associated with Hippocrates, Galen, and Ibn Sina. University medicine did not replace every other kind of care. Local healers, surgeons, midwives, apothecaries, and religious institutions remained important. But universities created new pathways for credentials and professional identity. Medicine began to be shaped not only by experience and apprenticeship, but by formal education and examination. For now, leave the instruments still on the table and let the quiet of the room take over. For a few seconds, let your mind become as still as a darkened library, with every page safe and every question allowed to remain unanswered. Fact 36. The Black Death changed how many communities thought about illness and public order. The plague pandemic that reached Europe, North Africa, and West Asia in the 14th century caused immense loss of life and fear. Medical ideas at the time could not fully explain the disease, but communities responded with prayer, flight, regulation, care, burial practices, and attempts to control movement. The Black Death did not create public health from nothing. Yet, it increased attention to how illness could affect whole cities and regions. When disease spreads widely, people begin to see that health is not only private. It becomes a shared concern shaped by housing, travel, work, and governance. Picture an old garden of medicinal plants beneath the moon, each leaf moving gently in a cool night breeze. Picture the long chain of people who cared for others before you were here, moving quietly through time like a distant line of warm lamps. Fact 37. Quarantine grew from efforts to manage epidemic risk in port cities. The word quarantine is connected with a period of waiting used in some Mediterranean port cities during the late medieval and early modern periods. Ships, travelers, and goods could be held apart when disease was feared. These measures were imperfect and often shaped by commerce and politics, as well as health. Still, they show an early attempt to manage the risks of connected travel. A port city had to balance trade with safety. The history of quarantine is therefore difficult was incomplete, and fear was high. Let the next chapter wait. There is nowhere you need to go tonight. You do not need to solve the whole history of the body. A slow breath and a quiet room are enough for this moment. Fact 38. Renaissance anatomy challenged the authority of old books. During the Renaissance, European scholars increasingly performed dissections and compared what they saw with the writings of earlier authorities. This did not happen all at once, and anatomy had been studied before. But printing, universities, artists, and new forms of visual representation gave anatomical investigation greater reach. The body became something that could be observed in more detail, drawn, labeled, and debated. This did not make medicine instantly modern. It did, however, strengthen a habit that would become central to science. When a respected text and a careful observation disagree, the observation must be taken seriously. Imagine a distant bell marking the hour, while the long history of care continues without demanding your attention. Let the idea of care become simple again. A hand nearby, a gentle voice, and time moving slowly through the night. Fact 39. Printing changed the speed at which medical knowledge could circulate. Before printing, medical books had to be copied by hand. They were expensive, slow to reproduce, and often available only to a limited number of readers. Printing made it easier to produce editions, diagrams, manuals, herbals, and reports in greater numbers. Errors could also spread more quickly, and access remained unequal. But the basic change was enormous. A medical idea, guide, could travel farther and reach more students than before. The printed page turned medicine into a more widely shared conversation, with readers comparing, criticizing, and building on what they found. Rest beside this thought for a moment, as if sitting near a window in a quiet room after everyone has gone home. Imagine a clock ticking softly in a hallway, not asking anything from you, only marking that the night is becoming deeper. Fact 40. Andreas Vesalius made anatomy more visual and more contested. Andreas Vesalius published a major anatomical work in 1543 that used detailed illustrations and emphasized direct study of the human body. He challenged several ideas inherited from Galen, whose anatomy had often relied on animal dissection. Vesalius did not create anatomy from nothing, but his work became a symbol of a new willingness to question authority through observation. His beautifully printed images also mattered. They invited readers to look closely. The human body became not just a subject of inherited theory, but a landscape that could be investigated with fresh eyes. Let the knowledge become a soft background hum, steady and distant, while your own thoughts begin to slow. The facts can remain in the background now, like a calm conversation heard from another room as sleep begins to arrive. Fact 41. Paracelsus argued for a different approach to medicines and disease. Paracelsus was a 16th century physician and writer who criticized parts of traditional humoral medicine. He promoted the use of chemical substances and challenged the idea that ancient authorities should always be followed. Some of his views were controversial, and not all of them are accepted today. His historical importance lies in his restless questioning. He insisted that medicine should learn from nature, craft, and experience as well as books. Paracelsus represents a period when medical thinkers were becoming more willing to argue openly about what medicine should be. Let that thought settle for a moment, like a page resting quietly on a desk after a lamp has been lowered. Somewhere in the past, a caregiver is preparing a room, a bed, a note, or a simple cup of water. The work is quiet, and you can let it continue without you. Fact 42. William Harvey described the circulation of blood in a new way. In the 17th century, William Harvey used observation, experiment, and calculation to argue that blood circulates continuously through the body, driven by the heart. His work challenged older Galenic ideas about how blood moved and was used. Harvey's argument did not depend on one striking observation. It depended on a pattern of evidence and a willingness to calculate what the body could and could not do. The history of circulation shows how a good explanation can change when someone asks a simple but powerful question. Where does all this blood actually go? Picture an old hospital corridor growing still, with only soft light beneath a distant doorway. There is no need to hold every detail. Let the old names, places, and discoveries pass by, like lights in faraway windows. Fact 43. The microscope opened new worlds that the unaided eye could not see. The development of microscopes in the 17th century allowed observers to examine tissues, insects, plant structures, and tiny living things in new ways. Early instruments were limited, and the images they produced required skill to interpret. Yet they changed the scale of inquiry. The body and the natural world no longer ended at the surface visible to the eye. A drop of water, a piece of cork, or a thin slice of tissue could contain a hidden landscape. Medicine gained a new kind of vision, one that would later transform anatomy, pathology, and microbiology. Take an easy breath and let the names become lighter, leaving only the calm shape of a long human story. Imagine the shelves of history closing, gently, not disappearing, only waiting calmly until someone wishes to return. Fact 44. Antony van Leeuwenhoek described microscopic living things. Antony van Leeuwenhoek used simple but powerful lenses to observe tiny organisms in water and other materials. He called them animalcules. His observations did not immediately create germ theory, because people still needed to understand what these tiny beings had to do with illness. But his work expanded the imaginable world. It showed that life existed at a scale previously hidden from ordinary sight. Medical history often moves in stages like this. First, someone sees something new. Much later, others learn how to explain why it matters. Imagine a small glass bottle on a wooden shelf, catching a little moonlight before the room becomes quiet again. The story can continue at its own pace. You can rest beside it as though listening to rain beyond a softly lit room. Fact 45. Pathology connected illness with changes inside the body. As anatomy developed, physicians increasingly studied organs and tissues after death to understand what illness had done inside the body. This field became known as pathology. It helped shift attention from broad theories of imbalance towards specific changes in organs, cells, and tissues. The change was gradual and uneven. Doctors still needed to listen to patients and observe symptoms, but pathology gave them another kind of evidence. It suggested that disease could have a physical location and structure. The body became a place where illness left traces that could be studied. Let the history pause here, as though a library has closed for the night, and the books have begun to rest. For a few seconds, let your mind become as still as a darkened library, with every page safe and every question allowed to remain unanswered. Fact 46. Giovanni Battista Morgagni helped link symptoms with organs. In the 18th century, Morgagni published observations that connected patients' symptoms during life with changes found in organs after death. His work became important in the development of anatomical pathology. The basic idea seems simple now, but it changed the way many physicians thought. Instead of seeing disease only as a general disturbance of the whole body, they could ask which organ had been altered and how that alteration might explain what the patient experienced. Medicine became more precise by learning to connect of illness with structures inside the body. For a moment, leave the questions open. They have waited across centuries and can wait until morning. Picture the long chain of people who cared for others before you were here, moving quietly through time like a distant line of warm lamps. Fact 47. Percussion turned tapping into a diagnostic tool. In the 18th century, Leopold Auenbrugger described how tapping on the chest could help a physician judge what lay beneath. The technique, called percussion, uses sound as a clue. A hollow sound and a dull sound can suggest different conditions inside the chest. The idea was not immediately adopted everywhere, but it eventually became part of clinical examination. Percussion is a good example of medicine learning from ordinary senses. A hand, an ear, a patient. Attention can sometimes produce useful information before any machine is involved. Picture a careful hand turning the page of an old manuscript, not in a hurry, only following the line slowly onward. You do not need to solve the whole history of the body. A slow breath and a quiet room are enough for this moment. Fact 48. The stethoscope changed the soundscape of medicine. René Laennec developed an early stethoscope in the 19th century, creating a way for physicians to listen more closely to the heart and lungs. Before that, doctors often placed an ear directly on a patient's chest. The instrument created both practical distance and new intimacy. It made internal sounds easier to hear and compare. Over time, the stethoscope became one of the most recognizable symbols of medicine. Its history reminds us that diagnosis often begins with listening, not only to machines, but to breath, rhythm, murmurs, and the patient's own account. Let the room become peaceful again, with the soft sound of rain or wind somewhere beyond the window. Let the idea of care become simple again. A hand nearby, a gentle voice, and time moving slowly through the night. Fact 49. Anesthesia changed what surgery could attempt. Reliable surgical anesthesia developed during the 19th centuries, especially during the 19th century, especially through the use of ether and later other agents. Earlier surgery could be fast, but pain limited what surgeons could safely attempt and what patients could endure. Anesthesia did not solve every danger. Infection, bleeding, and shock remained major problems. Still, it changed the possibilities of surgical care. Operations could become slower, more deliberate, and more complex. The history of anesthesia is also a history of respect for pain. It helped make the relief of suffering a central goal rather than an unavoidable background condition. Imagine a low lamp in a quiet ward, steady enough to make the shadows gentle rather than dark. Imagine a clock ticking softly in a hallway, not asking anything from you, only marking that the night is becoming deeper. Fact 50. Antisepsis transformed the risks of surgery. Century. In the 19th century, Joseph Lister promoted antiseptic methods in surgery, drawing on ideas about microorganisms and decay. His approach involved cleaning wounds, instruments, and surroundings in an effort to reduce infection. Practices changed over time as knowledge improved, but the larger lesson remained. Surgery was not only about skillful cutting, it was also about preventing invisible dangers from entering the wound. The operating room became a place of careful preparation, cleanliness, and controlled procedure. This was one of the changes that made modern surgery far safer than it had been before. Rest with the thought that medicine is often built from small observations noticed again and again. The facts can remain in the background now, like a calm conversation heard from another room as sleep begins to arrive. Fact 51. Ignaz Semmelweis saw the importance of hand hygiene in maternity care. In the 1840s, Ignaz Semmelweis observed that women in one maternity clinic died of childbed fever more often than women in another. He linked the difference to doctors and students, moving from autopsies to deliveries, and introduced hand washing with a chlorinated solution. Death rates fell. His ideas were not fully accepted in his lifetime, partly because the mechanisms of infection were not yet widely understood. Semmelweis's story is often told as a lesson in hand washing, but it is also a lesson in listening to evidence even when it challenges custom and authority. Let the fact drift away at its own pace, leaving behind only the idea of care continuing softly in the background. Somewhere in the past, a caregiver is preparing a room, a bed, a note, or a simple cup of water. The work is quiet, and you can let it continue without you. Fact 52. John Snow used local evidence to investigate cholera in London. During the 1854 cholera outbreak in London, John Snow studied cases around the Broad Street water pump. His work included mapping where people lived and asking practical questions about water use. He argued that cholera was linked with contaminated water, rather than only with bad air. Snow did not solve cholera by himself, and public health involved many other people and long-term sanitation work. But his investigation became a classic example of epidemiology, using patterns in a community to understand how disease may spread and where prevention might matter most. Picture a city at night where clean water moves through hidden pipes and people settle into sleep without seeing the work that protects them. There is no need to hold every detail. Let the old names, places, and discoveries pass by like lights in faraway windows. Fact 53. Clean water and sanitation changed population health. In the 19th and 20th centuries, cities expanded rapidly, often faster than safe water and waste systems could keep pace. Investments in water treatment, sewage, garbage removal, housing standards, and food safety helped reduce many infectious risks. These changes did not come from one person or one invention. They required engineers, public officials, workers, scientists, and residents. Public health can seem less dramatic than a new medicine, but it often saves lives by changing the conditions in which people live. A clean water pipe may have as much historical importance as a celebrated laboratory discovery. Take a slow breath and imagine a calm archive full of notebooks, diagrams, and old letters waiting quietly in the dark. Imagine the shelves of history closing gently, not disappearing, only waiting calmly until someone wishes to return. Fact 54. Germ theory changed how many people understood infection. During the 19th century, research by several scientists helped establish that microorganisms could cause specific diseases. This was not a single, sudden discovery by one person. It developed through experiments, microscopes, improved laboratories, and many debates. Germ theory changed practices in surgery, sanitation, food safety, and public health. It gave an explanation for why cleaning hands, treating water, and controlling contamination could matter. The most important shift was invisible. People began to understand that tiny living agents could connect one person's illness with another person's environment. Allow the story to become softer at the edges, like footsteps fading down a long, empty hallway. The story can continue at its own pace. You can rest beside it, as though listening to rain beyond a softly lit room. Fact 55. Louis Pasteur helped reshape ideas about microbes and vaccination. Louis Pasteur's work on fermentation, microorganisms, and disease helped change 19th century science. He challenged the idea that living things could arise spontaneously in ordinary conditions and developed vaccines, animal diseases, and later for rabies. His work was part of a wider scientific movement, not a lone miracle, but it helped connect laboratory investigation with practical prevention. Pasteur's history shows how research can move between questions that seem separate. Why wine spoils, why animals become ill, how microbes behave, and how immunity might be encouraged. For now, leave the instrument still on the table and let the quiet of the room take over. For a few seconds, let your mind become as still as a darkened library, with every page safe and every question allowed to remain unanswered. Fact 56. Robert Koch linked particular microbes with particular diseases. Robert Koch developed methods for studying bacteria and helped demonstrate connections between specific microorganisms and specific diseases. His work on anthrax, tuberculosis, and cholera became central to bacteriology. The ideas often called Koch's postulates were later refined because real infections can be more complex than a simple checklist. Still, Koch's work helped medicine move toward a more precise language of causation. It encouraged researchers to isolate, grow, observe, and compare microbes. The invisible world, first seen through lenses, became a practical field of investigation. Picture an old garden of medicinal plants beneath the moon, each leaf moving gently in a cool night breeze. Picture the long chain of people who cared for others before you were here, moving quietly through time, like a distant line of warm lamps. Fact 57. Florence Nightingale helped make nursing, data, and sanitation more visible. Florence Nightingale is often remembered as the lady with the lamp. But her historical importance also includes statistics, hospital reform, and nursing education. During and after the Crimean War, she used records and visual presentations of data to argue for better sanitation and organization. Her work did not create nursing from nothing. Countless women and men had cared for the sick long before her, but she helped make nursing more formalized and publicly valued. She also showed that numbers can tell a story when they reveal patterns of preventable suffering. Let the next chapter wait. There is nowhere you need to go tonight. You do not need to solve the whole history of the body. A slow breath and a quiet room are enough for this moment. Fact 58. Hospitals gradually became places for diagnosis, teaching, and research. Hospitals have existed in many forms across different cultures, but during the 19th century, many urban hospitals in Europe and North America increasingly became centers for clinical teaching, hard diagnosis, surgery, and research. This changed the relationship between patients, students, physicians, and institutions. Hospitals could offer resources not available in a private home, but they also reflected inequalities of class, race, gender, and access. Their history is never only about progress. A hospital is a place where care, authority, learning, technology, and social power meet in the same building. Imagine a distant bell marking the hour, while the long history of care continues without demanding your attention. Let the idea of care become simple again. A hand nearby, a gentle voice, and time moving slowly through the night. Fact 59. Medical education slowly became more standardized. In the 19th and 20th centuries, many countries developed more formal systems for medical schools. Licensing, examinations, laboratories, and clinical training. The details varied enormously by place. Standardization could improve safety and accountability, but it could also exclude people who had previously practiced as healers, midwives, or community experts. The history of professional medicine is therefore mixed. It includes efforts to improve training, but also struggles over who was allowed to learn, practice, and be recognized. Every credential tells a story about knowledge and power. Rest beside this thought for a moment, as if sitting near a window in a quiet room after everyone has gone home. Imagine a clock ticking softly in a hallway, not asking anything from you, only marking that the night is becoming deeper. Fact 60. Variolation existed before modern vaccination. Long before Edward Jenner's smallpox vaccine, people in different parts of the world used variolation, a practice that intentionally exposed a healthy person to material from smallpox in hopes of producing a milder illness and later protection. The practice carried real risk, but it showed that communities had recognized something important about immunity before modern microbiology existed. And rest. Variolation had histories in Asia, the Ottoman world, Africa, and elsewhere. The story of vaccination does not begin in one European village. It begins with many communities trying to protect themselves from a feared disease. Let the knowledge become a soft background hum, steady and distant, while your own thoughts begin to slow. The facts can remain in the background now, like a calm conversation heard from another room as sleep begins to arrive. Fact 61. Knowledge of smallpox inoculation moved across cultures and continents. In the early 18th century, Lady Mary Wortley Montagu promoted smallpox inoculation in Britain after observing the practice in the Ottoman Empire. At a similar time in colonial Boston, Onesimus, an enslaved West African man, told Cotton Mather about inoculation practices. He knew. These histories matter because they correct a simple story in which medical knowledge travels only from Europe outward. Ideas about protection against smallpox moved through Ottoman, African, Asian, and European worlds. Medicine advances through many kinds of exchange, including exchanges that older histories often ignored. Let that thought settle for a moment, like a page resting quietly on a desk after a lamp has been lowered. Somewhere in the past, a caregiver is preparing a room, a bed, a note, or a simple cup of water. The work is quiet, and you can let it continue without you. Fact 62. Edward Jenner's work gave vaccination its most famous early form. In 1796, Edward Jenner tested the idea that exposure to cowpox could protect against smallpox. His work built on local observations and earlier practices rather than appearing from nowhere. The later word, vaccine, came from vacca, the Latin word for cow. Jenner's approach was safer than variolation because it used a related but less dangerous virus. The history is still ethically uncomfortable by modern standards, especially because it involved a child. Remembering both the scientific importance and the ethical context helps us tell the story honestly. Picture an old hospital corridor, growing still with only soft light beneath a distant doorway. There is no need to hold every detail. Let the old names, places, and discoveries pass by like lights in faraway windows. Fact 63. Vaccination required trust, production, transport, and public cooperation. A vaccine is not useful only because it exists in a laboratory. It must be made reliably, stored, transported, offered fairly, explained clearly, and accepted by communities. The history of vaccination includes scientific work, but also health workers, local leaders, nurses, record keepers, and families. It includes public enthusiasm, skepticism, rumors, mandates, and debates about responsibility. This wider story matters because prevention is always social. A small vial may hold a biological tool, but its impact depends on many people working together across distances and generations. Take an easy breath and let the names become lighter, leaving only the calm shape of a long human story. Imagine the shelves of history closing gently, not disappearing, only waiting calmly until someone wishes to return. Fact 64. Pasteur's later vaccines expanded the possibilities of prevention. In the 19th century, Pasteur and his collaborators developed vaccines for diseases including anthrax in animals and rabies in humans after exposure. These efforts built on the growing idea that microbes could be weakened or altered to train the body's defenses. The work was experimental and controversial in its time. It also helped open a new era in which prevention could be designed in laboratories as well as discovered in local practice. The history of vaccines shows a gradual widening of possibility, not only responding after illness begins, but trying to reduce the chance that it begins at all. Imagine a small glass bottle on a wooden shelf, catching a little moonlight before the room becomes quiet again. The story can continue at its own pace. You can rest beside it, as though listening to rain beyond a softly lit room. 65. Public health relies on noticing patterns across whole communities. A physician may care for one patient at a time, but public health asks broader questions. Where are cases rising? Which neighborhoods lack clean water? What conditions make injury or disease more likely? Are some groups excluded from care? Over time, health departments and public institutions developed ways to collect reports, trace outbreaks, and share information. Indeed, these systems are not perfect, and they depend on trust and resources. Yet they show that health can be studied at the level of streets, cities, workplaces, and nations, as well as individual bodies. Let the history pause here, as though a library has closed for the night and the books have begun to rest. For a few seconds, let your mind become as still as a darkened library, with every page safe and every question allowed to remain unanswered. Fact 66. X-rays allowed physicians to see inside the body without surgery. When Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen discovered X-rays in 1895, the result seemed almost magical. For the first time, people could see bones and some internal structures without opening the body. Early X-ray use also carried risks that were not immediately understood, and safety practices had to improve over time. But the discovery transformed diagnosis. A broken bone, swallowed object, or chest condition could become visible in a new way. Medical imaging changed the relationship between the body and the eye. The invisible inside became something that could be studied through light and shadow. For a moment, leave the questions open. They have waited across centuries and can wait until morning. Picture the long chain of people who cared for others before you were here, moving quietly through time like a distant line of warm lamps. Fact 67. The electrocardiogram made the heart's electrical rhythm visible. The electrocardiogram, or ECG, developed from late 19th and early 20th century work on electrical activity in the body. It gave physicians a way to record the heart's rhythm as lines on paper. This was another important change in medical history. a bodily process that could be felt as a pulse or heard through a stethoscope could now be measured and compared over time. Instruments do not replace patients' stories, but they can add another layer of evidence. The history of medicine is full of such translations, from body to signal, from signal to record, from record to interpretation. Picture a careful hand turning the page of an old manuscript, not in a hurry, only following the line slowly onward. You do not need to solve the whole history of the body. A slow breath and a quiet room are enough for this moment. Fact 68. Blood groups made safer transfusion possible. At the beginning of the 20th century, Karl Landsteiner's work on blood groups helped explain why some transfusions succeeded and others failed dangerously. Blood had long fascinated healers and physicians, but transfusion became more practical when compatibility could be understood. Later developments in storage, testing, donation systems, and emergency care expanded its use. The history of transfusion is a story of chemistry, biology, organization, and generosity. It depends not only on science, but also on people willing to donate and on systems able to match, store, and deliver blood safely. Let the room become peaceful again with the soft sound of rain or wind somewhere beyond the window. Let the idea of care become simple again. A hand nearby, a gentle voice, and time moving slowly through the night. Fact 69. Transfusion systems grew through science and organization together. Even after blood groups were understood, transfusion required many further steps. Blood had to be collected, stored, tested, transported, and given under carefully organized conditions. Wars, disasters, hospitals, and public health systems all influenced the development of blood banks and donation services. This is another reminder that medicine does not advance through discoveries alone. A discovery becomes useful when institutions, workers, equipment, and procedures make it available to patients. The history of blood services is quiet but profound. A chain of careful actions linking one person's donation to another person's need. Imagine a low lamp in a quiet ward, steady enough to make the shadows gentle rather than dark. Imagine a clock ticking softly in a hallway, not asking anything from you, only marking that the night is becoming deeper. Fact 70. Insulin changed the history of diabetes care. In the early 1920s, research by Frederick Banting, Charles Best, J.J.R. MacLeod, James Collip, and others led to the development of insulin treatment for people with diabetes. Before insulin, severe diabetes was often fatal, especially for children and young people. The discovery did not end the challenges of the disease, and access has remained an important issue. But insulin transformed what was possible. It showed how laboratory work, animal research, chemical purification, clinical care, and manufacturing could come together to change lives. Medical history sometimes turns on a substance, small enough to fit in a vial. Rest with the thought that medicine is often built from small observations noticed again and again. The facts can remain in the background now, like a calm conversation heard from another room, as sleep begins wins. Fact arrive. Fact 71. Sulfonamide drugs were early modern antibacterial medicines. Before penicillin became widely available, sulfonamide drugs offered new ways to treat some bacterial infections. Their development in the 1930s marked an important step in the age of antimicrobial medicine. These drugs were not perfect and their benefits and risks varied. But they showed that chemical compounds could be developed and tested against particular infectious threats. The history of sulfonamides is often overshadowed by penicillin, yet it belongs to the same larger transformation. Yet, infection began to look less like an unavoidable fate, and more like something that might sometimes be treated directly. Let the fact drift away at its own pace, leaving behind only the idea of care continuing softly in the background. Somewhere in the past, a caregiver is preparing a room, a bed, a note, or a simple cup of water. The work is quiet, and you can let it continue without you. Fact 72. Penicillin became a symbol of the antibiotic era. Alexander Fleming observed the antibacterial effects of a mold in 1928, turning penicillin into a widely usable medicine, required later work by Howard Florey, Ernst Chain, and many researchers, technicians, companies, and public institutions. During the Second World War, production expanded rapidly. The story is often told as a single accidental discovery, but it was really a long chain of observation, purification, testing, engineering, and manufacturing. Penicillin changed medical expectations because infections that had once been feared could sometimes be treated with remarkable success. We picture a city at night where clean water moves through hidden pipes and people settle into sleep without seeing the work that protects them. There is no need to hold every detail. Let the old names, places, and discoveries pass by like lights in faraway windows. Fact 73. Mass production made penicillin a public achievement, not only a laboratory discovery. A medicine can be discovered in one place and still remain unavailable to most people. For penicillin became systemically powerful when production methods allowed it to reach large numbers of patients. This required industrial fermentation, quality control, logistics, and collaboration across universities, governments, and companies. The lesson is bigger than penicillin. Modern medicine depends on the ability to make useful knowledge practical, at scale. A brilliant idea matters, but so do the people who build the systems that turn it into something that can actually receive. Bite the fight, take a slow breath, and imagine a calm archive, full of notebooks, diagrams, and old letters waiting quietly in the dark. Imagine the shelves of history, closing gently, not disappearing, only waiting calmly until someone wishes to return. Fact 74. Antibiotic resistance became part of the story almost immediately. Antibiotics changed medicine, but bacteria can evolve and share ways of resisting drugs. Resistance was observed early in the antibiotic era and remains a major challenge. The historical lesson is not that antibiotics failed, it is that biology responds. Ions A powerful medicine can create new pressures, and its long-term usefulness depends on careful stewardship, research, infection prevention, and public systems. The history of antibiotics is therefore both hopeful and cautionary. It shows what human ingenuity can achieve, while reminding us that living systems continue to change. Allow the story to become softer at the edges, like footsteps fading down a long, empty hallway. The story can continue at its own pace. You can rest beside it, as though listening to rain beyond a softly lit room. Fact 75. Randomized clinical trials strengthened the way treatments are evaluated. In the 20th century, researchers increasingly developed methods for comparing treatments fairly. Randomized controlled trials became especially important because they could reduce some forms of bias. One famous early example was the 1948 British trial of streptomycin for tuberculosis. Trials are not the only source of medical knowledge, and they must be designed ethically and interpreted carefully. But they changed how medicine asks whether a treatment truly helps. Instead of relying only on authority or individual impressions, researchers could compare groups and look for patterns in evidence. For now, leave the instruments still on the table and let the quiet of the room take over. For a few seconds, let your mind become as still as a darkened library, with every page safe and every question allowed to remain unanswered. Fact 76. Polio vaccines became a major mid-20th century public health achievement. Polio once caused widespread fear because it could paralyze children and adults. In the 1950s, Jonas Salk's inactivated polio vaccine and later Albert Sabine's oral vaccine helped transform prevention efforts. Their success depended on large trials, manufacturing, public trust, and mass immunization programs. The global campaign against polio also showed the importance of international cooperation. Vaccines can be biological tools, but their history is also about communities. A dose must reach children in many different places, often through the steady work of local health teams. Picture an old garden of medicinal plants beneath the moon, each leaf moving gently in a cool night breeze. Picture the long chain of people who cared for others before you were here, moving quietly through time like a distant line of warm lamps. Fact 77. Smallpox eradication showed what coordinated global health could achieve. Smallpox was officially declared eradicated by the World Health Organization in 1980. This achievement did not come from vaccination alone. It depended on surveillance, rapid response, local health workers, international cooperation, better vaccine delivery, and careful containment of outbreaks. In some regions, searching for cases and vaccinating close contacts proved especially important. Smart. Smallpox eradication remains a landmark because it showed that countries with different politics and resources could work toward a shared public health goal. It is one of history's clearest examples of prevention succeeding on a global. Let the next chapter wait. Let the next chapter wait. There is nowhere you need to go tonight. You do not need to solve the whole history of the body. A slow breath and a quiet room are enough for this moment. Fact 78. The World Health Organization created a global forum for health cooperation. The World Health Organization began work in 1948, after the Second World War, as part of a broader effort to build international institutions. Its role has included setting standards, collecting information, coordinating responses, and supporting member states. Satarid. No global organization can solve every health problem alone. Though depends on countries, communities, researchers, and health workers. Its history nevertheless shows that medicine and health do not stop at national borders. Diseases, supplies, knowledge, and people move. Cooperation becomes part of care when the challenges are shared. Imagine a distant bell marking the hour, while the long history of care continues without demanding your attention. Let the idea of care become simple again. A hand nearby, a gentle voice, and time moving slowly through the night. Fact 79. Oral rehydration therapy showed the power of simple science and local delivery. In the 20th century, research on oral rehydration helped transform care for severe diarrheal illness, especially in children. The underlying insight involved how the intestine absorbs water and salts when certain substances are combined in the right proportions. The history is important because it shows that life-saving advances are not always dramatic machines or rare drugs. Sometimes they involve a simple, affordable approach supported by good science, clear communication, and widespread access. The SORPER. Public health progress often comes from making effective care practical in ordinary settings. Rest beside this thought for a moment, as if sitting near a window in a quiet room after everyone has gone home. Imagine a clock ticking softly in a hallway, not asking anything from you, only marking that the night is becoming deeper. Fact 80. Modern imaging expanded far beyond the first X-ray. During the 20th century, technologies such as ultrasound, computed tomography, magnetic resonance imaging, and other forms of scanning made it possible to view the body in new ways. Each method emerged from different areas of physics, engineering, mathematics, and medicine. Images could reveal soft tissues, blood flow, organs, and structures that early X-rays could not show clearly. Yet an image is never the whole patient. It needs interpretation, context, and conversation. The history of imaging is a story of new vision, but also of learning how to read what vision reveals. Let the knowledge become a soft background hum, steady and distant, while your own thoughts begin to slow. The facts can remain in the background now, like a calm conversation heard from another room as sleep begins to arrive. Fact 81. Organ transplantation required advances in surgery, immunology, and ethics. Modern organ transplantation developed through many stages. Surgical technique, understanding of blood supply, matching systems, medicines that reduce rejection, intensive care, and ethical rules for donation. The history includes remarkable successes, but also difficult questions about consent, fairness, scarcity, and who receives care. A transplant is not simply a technical event. It involves donors, families, surgical teams, coordinators, and long-term care. The field shows how medicine can create new possibilities while also creating new responsibilities. Every advance asks society to decide how it should be used. Let that thought settle for a moment, like a page resting quietly on a desk after a lamp has been lowered. Somewhere in the past, a caregiver is preparing a room, a bed, a note, or a simple cup of water. The work is quiet, and you can let it continue without you. Fact 82. Genetics changed how medicine understood inheritance and disease. The 20th century brought major advances in understanding chromosomes, DNA, genes, and inherited conditions. The discovery of DNA's double helical structure in 1953 became one important symbol of this new era. Though it depended on work by many scientists, including Rosalind Franklin and others whose roles were long undervalued, genetics did not replace older parts of medicine. It added another layer. Doctors and researchers could begin to ask how molecular differences influence health. The history of genetics also includes ethical debates about privacy, discrimination, consent, and the responsible use of powerful information. Picture an old hospital corridor growing still with only soft light beneath a distant doorway. There is no need to hold every detail. Let the old names, places, and discoveries pass by like lights in faraway windows. Fact 83. Medical ethics became more formal after terrible abuses were exposed. The history of medical research includes important achievements, but it also includes serious abuses in which people were harmed, deceived, or treated as means rather than persons. After the Second World War, the Nuremberg Code became a landmark statement of principles for research involving human beings, especially the importance of voluntary informed consent. Later ethical standards developed further. This history matters because scientific ability does not automatically create moral wisdom. Research must be guided by respect, transparency, fairness, and a commitment not to harm the people it is meant to serve. Take an easy breath and let the names become lighter, leaving only the calm shape of a long human story. Imagine the shelves of history closing gently, not disappearing, only waiting calmly until someone wishes to return. Fact 84. Informed consent changed the relationship between patients and medicine. Informed consent means more than signing a form. In its strongest sense, it involves giving people understandable information, respecting their choices, and recognizing that they have a right to participate in both decisions about their own bodies. The modern history of consent developed through ethics, law, patient advocacy, and painful lessons from abuses. It is still imperfect in practice, especially when language, power, disability, poverty, or fear make communication difficult. But the principle changed the moral center of medicine. Patients are not simply objects of treatment. They are people with voices and rights. Imagine a small glass bottle on a wooden shelf, catching a little moonlight before the room becomes quiet again. The story can continue at its own pace. You can rest beside it, as though listening to rain beyond a softly lit room. Fact 85. Research has had to confront who gets included and who gets overlooked. For much of medical history, research often focused on groups that were easiest to study or most powerful in society, while women, children, older adults, racialized communities, disabled people and others could be excluded or poorly represented. Over time, critics and advocates pushed for more inclusive research and more attention to differences in health outcomes. This is not only a question of fairness. It affects the quality of knowledge itself. Medicine understands people better when it does not assume that one group's experience automatically represents everyone. Let the history pause here, as though a library has closed for the night and the books have begun to rest. For a few seconds, let your mind become as still as a darkened library, with every page safe and every question allowed to remain unanswered. Fact 86. Midwifery has remained essential across the long history of childbirth care. Birth has always required knowledge, support, and community, but the people and settings involved have changed greatly across time and place. Midwives have played central roles in many societies, often carrying experience that was learned through apprenticeship and close contact with families. In some periods, formal medical institutions tried to control or replace midwifery. In others, midwives worked alongside physicians and nurses. The history of childbirth care is not a simple story of old versus new. It is a story of changing knowledge, technology, social expectations, and the need for respectful support. For a moment, leave the questions open. They have waited across centuries and can wait until morning. Picture the long chain of people who cared for others before you were here, moving quietly through time like a distant line of warm lamps. Fact 87. Women have shaped medicine as patients, caregivers, healers, researchers, and physicians. Women's contributions to medicine are much broader than older histories often suggested. They have cared for families, served as midwives and nurses, developed remedies, written medical texts, conducted research, organized public health work, and practiced as physicians, despite exclusion and discrimination. In many countries, women fought long campaigns for access to medical, education, and professional recognition. Their stories matter because they reveal how medicine has been shaped by social barriers as well as scientific ideas. A history that names only famous male doctors misses a large part of the work of healing. Picture a careful hand turning the page of an old manuscript. Not in a hurry, only following the line, slowly onward. You do not need to solve the whole history of the body. A slow breath and a quiet room are enough for this moment. Fact 88. Nursing has always involved knowledge as well as compassion. Nursing is sometimes described only as kindness, but its history also includes observation, record-keeping, technical skill, education, advocacy, and leadership. Nurses notice changes in patients, organize care, teach families, manage complex systems, and often provide continuity when many other people come and go. Formal nursing schools and professional standards developed over time. Caregiving itself is much older. The history of nursing reminds us that medicine depends on work that can be quiet and repetitive. Checking, listening, cleaning, documenting, comforting, and returning again when someone needs help. Let the room become peaceful again, with the soft sound of rain or wind somewhere beyond the window. Let the idea of care become simple again. A hand nearby, a gentle voice, and time moving slowly through the night. Fact 89. Rehabilitation changed ideas about what medical care can aim for. As medicine developed ways to help people survive injuries and on illness, rehabilitation became more important. The goal was not only to prevent death, but also to support movement, communication, independence, adaptation, and participation in life. Wars, industrial injuries, polio, disability, advocacy, and changing social attitudes all influenced this history. Rehabilitation reminds us that health is not simply the absence of disease. It is also about what people can do, how they live, and whether society removes barriers or creates them. Recovery is often a long road, not one dramatic moment. Imagine a low lamp in a quiet ward, steady enough to make the shadows gentle rather than dark. Imagine a clock ticking softly in a hallway, not asking anything from you, only marking that the night is becoming deeper. Fact 90. The history of mental health care has changed with ideas about mind, society, and rights. Different cultures have explained distress, altered behavior, and mental suffering in different ways. Over time, some people were cared for in families or communities, while others were confined in institutions that could be overcrowded and harmful. The rise of psychiatry, psychology, community care, medications, and patient advocacy changed many practices, but no single story captures every place. The history is important because it shows how strongly social attitudes shape care. Language, stigma, fear can all influence compassion what happens to someone who is suffering. Rest with the thought that medicine is often built from small observations noticed again and again. The facts can remain in the background now, like a calm conversation heard from another room as sleep begins to arrive. Fact 91. Indigenous medical knowledge is living knowledge, not only ancient history. Across the world, indigenous communities have developed deep knowledge of plants, food, childbirth, ecology, healing, and relationships between people and land. These traditions are diverse and belong to specific communities. They should not be treated as a collection of freely available secrets or as a simple prelude to modern medicine. A respectful history recognizes that indigenous knowledge is living, that communities have rights over how it is shared, and that colonialism often disrupted or dismissed practices that carried generations of experience. Medicine has many histories, and not all of them sit inside the same archive. Let the fact drift away at its own pace, leaving behind only the idea of care continuing softly in the background. Somewhere in the past, a caregiver is preparing a room, a bed, a note, or a simple cup of water. The work is quiet, and you can let it continue without you. Fact 92. Colonialism shaped medicine through both exchange and unequal power. As empires expanded, medical knowledge, diseases, drugs, institutions, and personnel moved across the world. Some exchanges created new forms of research and care. Others were shaped by exploitation, racism, forced labor, and unequal access to resources. Colonial medicine often treated local communities as subjects to be controlled, rather than partners with knowledge of their own. A calm history should not hide this. Medicine can be used to help, but it can also reflect the power structures of its time. Understanding that history is part of building more respectful care in the future. The future. Picture a city at night where clean water moves through hidden pipes and people settle into sleep without seeing the work that protects them. There is no need to hold every detail. Let the old names, places, and discoveries pass by like lights in faraway windows. Fact 93. Epidemiology turns patterns into questions. Epidemiology studies how health and illness are distributed across populations and what factors may influence them. Its methods grew from many sources: death records, maps, censuses, surveys, laboratory tests, and community investigation. The field does not promise simple answers. A pattern may have several causes, and correlation is not automatically proof. But epidemiology gives health workers a way to look beyond one patient and ask what is happening across a town, workplace, school, or country. But it is medicine looking outward, trying to understand the conditions that shape many lives at once. Take a slow breath and imagine a calm archive, full of notebooks, diagrams, and old letters, waiting quietly in the dark. Imagine the shelves of history closing gently, not disappearing, only waiting calmly until someone wishes to return. Fact 94. Medical records became part of care and research. A medical record can seem ordinary: notes, measurements, test results, medication lists, letters, or images. But records carry memory. They are shelved different care records to understand what has happened before, track change over time, and learn from patterns across many patients. The history of record keeping also raises questions about privacy, accuracy, and who controls information. A record is never the same as the person it describes. Still, careful documentation has become one of medicine's quiet foundations. It turns a fleeting encounter into something that can be revisited and understood later. Allow the story to become softer at the edges, like footsteps fading down a long, empty hallway. The story can continue at its own pace. You can rest beside it, as though listening to rain beyond a softly lit room. Fact 95. Patients have helped reshape medicine through advocacy. Patients and families have often organized to demand better research, access, dignity, and recognition. Their efforts have influenced disability rights, cancer care, HIV treatment, rare disease research, mental health policy, and many other fields. This is an important correction to the old image of medicine as something delivered only from experts to passive recipients. People living with illness often know things about daily experience that institutions overlook. When patients speak, organize, and participate in research, they can change which questions are asked and which outcomes are considered important. For now, leave the instruments still on the table and let the quiet of the room take over. For a few seconds, let your mind become as still as a darkened library, with every page safe and every question allowed to remain unanswered. Fact 96. Prevention often begins outside of the clinic. Some of the biggest health improvements in history have come from changes in water, food safety, housing, workplace conditions, vaccination, road safety, education, and access to care. These are sometimes called social or environmental determinants of health. The phrase can sound technical, but the meaning is simple. A person's health is affected by where they live, what they breathe, whether they have safe food and water, and whether they can receive help when they need it. Medicine is not only about treating illness. It is also about building conditions in which illness is less likely to take hold. Picture an old garden of medicinal plants beneath the moon, each leaf moving gently in a cool night breeze. Picture the long chain of people who cared for others before you were here, moving quietly through time like a distant line of warm lamps. Fact 97. Public health systems depend on many kinds of workers. When people think about medicine, they may imagine a doctor and a patient in one room. Public health requires a much wider group: nurses, laboratory workers, sanitation staff, epidemiologists, vaccinators, administrators, community health workers, educators, drivers, translators, and local leaders. During outbreaks and emergencies, these roles become especially visible, but they matter every day. The history of public health is a history of teamwork. It shows that care can be organized across whole communities through many small, steady acts of preparation and communication. Let the next chapter wait. There is nowhere you need to go. Tonight, you do not need to solve the whole history of the body. A slow breath and a quiet room are enough for this moment. Fact 98. Medicine works best when different kinds of knowledge meet. A good medical decision may draw on laboratory science, imaging, a physical examination, a patient's history, nursing observation, family knowledge, and public health evidence. No single source tells the whole story every time. The history of medicine has repeatedly shown the value of combining perspectives. A microscope may reveal one thing, while a patient's words reveal another. A map may show a pattern, while a local caregiver understands why that pattern exists. Medicine becomes stronger when it listens across the different forms of knowing. Imagine a distant bell marking the hour, while the long history of care continues without demanding your attention. Let the idea of care become simple again. A hand nearby, a gentle voice, and time moving slowly through the night. Fact 99. New discoveries often correct older confidence. Many ideas once accepted in medicine were later revised or abandoned. Humoral theory, bloodletting for many conditions, and older explanations of infection all had long periods of influence. Their replacement did not happen because earlier people were foolish. They worked with the tools and evidence available to them. The lesson is not to laugh at the past. It is to remember that certainty can be temporary. Modern medicine also changes as new evidence appears. A respectful history teaches curiosity, caution, and the willingness to learn from being wrong. Rest beside this thought for a moment, as if sitting near a window in a quiet room after everyone has gone home. Imagine a clock ticking softly in a hallway, not asking anything from you, only marking that the night is becoming deeper. Fact 100. The history of medicine is still being written. New treatments and technologies, ethical debates, health systems, and patient movements continue to change medicine every day. Yet, the deepest themes remain familiar. People still want relief from pain, clear explanations, respectful care, and a chance to live well with illness or injury. The future of medicine will depend on science, but also on trust, fairness, communication, and the recognition that every patient is more than a diagnosis. The long history of medicine ends for tonight, where it began with one person noticing another and choosing to care. Let the knowledge become a soft background hum, steady and distant, while your own thoughts begin to slow. The facts can remain in the background now, like a calm conversation heard from another room as sleep begins to arrive. And now, our long journey through the history of medicine is becoming quiet. We have moved from hearths and healing plants to manuscripts, hospitals, microscopes, vaccines, nursing wards, laboratories, public health teams, and the many careful systems that help people care for one another. The story of medicine is not a straight road toward perfection. It is a continuing process of asking better questions, testing ideas, recognizing mistakes, protecting dignity, and learning from people in many places. Behind every famous discovery are countless patients, families, healers, technicians, nurses, midwives, researchers, cleaners, record keepers, teachers, and community workers. For tonight, you do not need to remember the entire journey. Let the old books close gently. Let the lamps in the ward grow dim. Let the quiet work of care continue somewhere beyond the edge of your thoughts. Thank you for spending this time with history to fall asleep. May your mind become still, your breathing remain slow, and your sleep arrive gently. Good night.